The mail-order bride who found 7 children, but no husband and one terrifying secret. Dakota Territory, November 1889. The cold wind sliced through the empty plains as Clara Bell, a 27-year-old woman from Missouri, stepped down from the rattling stagecoach, clutching a faded letter and a heart full of hope. She had left everything behind to marry Samuel Boyd, a man she'd never met but whose words had promised warmth, love, and a new beginning. The land stretched endlessly before her, silent except for the whisper of the wind and the creak of the old ranch gate. But as she reached the porch, no one came to greet her, only the sound of a child crying from inside the house. Pushing open the door, Clara froze. 7 small faces stared back at her, eyes wide with fear and hunger. "Where's your father?" she asked softly. The eldest boy stepped forward, trembling. "Ma'am," he whispered, "Pa's been gone a long time, and he's not coming back." Clara stood frozen in the doorway, the faint cry of the youngest child echoing through the cold wooden walls as the dim light of dusk slipped through the broken window. The smell of dust and old smoke filled the air, and her heart sank when she realized how empty the house felt. She took a cautious step inside, her boots creaking against the worn floorboards, and the children huddled together as if afraid of her shadow. The oldest boy, Eli, stood slightly in front, his thin shoulders tense, his eyes dark with something far older than his 14 years. Clara knelt down, trying to soften her voice. "It's all right," she whispered. "I'm Clara Bell. Your father sent for me." But none of them spoke. The silence pressed against her chest until she heard a small sniffle from the corner where little Ben clung to his sister's dress. Clara took a deep breath and set down her small trunk, forcing a trembling smile. "You must be hungry," she said gently. "Let's get you something warm." The pantry was nearly bare, just a few jars of beans, some hard bread, and a cold pot of soup that had turned gray. She worked quietly, her hands shaking from both fear and pity, while the children watched every move she made as if expecting her to vanish too. When she handed them food, their eyes softened, and Sarah, the 12-year-old, murmured a faint thank you. As the fire began to flicker in the hearth, the shadows danced on the cracked walls, and Clara felt the weight of loneliness settle deeper inside her. "When did your pa leave?" she finally asked. Eli's voice was low, rough, and filled with a kind of pain that made her skin crawl. "He went out one night before the snow came," he said. "Said he was going to fix something near the barn, but he never came back." Clara's gaze shifted toward the window, where the shape of the old barn stood against the fading sky, its door chained, its windows covered, and not a sound coming from within. Something about it made her chest tighten. "Have you looked for him?" she asked, but the boy only shook his head. "We're not supposed to go near it," he muttered. "He said it's dangerous." The twins clung to each other, whispering words she couldn't catch, and Ruth, with her soft brown eyes, asked in a small voice, "Miss Clara, are you going to leave too?" The question tore through her. She looked at their thin faces, their trembling hands, and something inside her hardened. "No," she said firmly, kneeling beside them. "I'm not going anywhere. You're safe now." The wind howled outside, rattling the windows like a warning. The fire dimmed, casting the room in a pale orange glow, and Clara's eyes lingered on the barn again. She didn't know what waited behind that locked door, but she could feel it. Something wasn't right here, somewhere beyond the cold walls and empty fields. A secret was waiting for her to uncover it. That night, after putting the children to bed, Clara sat near the dying fire, listening to the wind scrape against the windows like nails on wood. Her body was exhausted, but her mind wouldn't rest. The faces of the 7 children lingered before her eyes, their fear, their hope, their quiet hunger for something more than food. She knew she couldn't leave them, not in this cold place where every sound felt like a whisper from the past. At dawn, she made her decision. She would stay, not because of duty or fear, but because their small lives now depended on her. The next morning, she began to bring the old house back to life. She patched the torn curtains, boiled water to wash the children's clothes, and cooked what little food she could gather from the pantry and garden. Eli helped her fix the roof, climbing carefully while Clara handed him nails and held the ladder steady. Sarah swept the porch, humming softly, her thin arms trembling with effort. Noah fetched water from the frozen well, while Ruth kept the twins, Grace and Hope, busy sorting dried beans into bowls. Little Ben followed Clara everywhere, holding the hem of her skirt like it was his only anchor in the world. As days passed, the air inside the ranch began to change. Laughter, soft, hesitant at first, echoed through the once empty halls. Clara taught the little ones to read by the fire, tracing letters in the dust while the older ones listened quietly. Sometimes, she caught herself smiling at the warmth in their eyes, the way they began to call her Miss Clara, with trust that made her heart ache. Yet as night fell, peace always slipped away. When the children slept, the house would grow too quiet, and she would hear it again, the faint crunch of footsteps outside, slow and deliberate, circling the porch. Once she told herself it was just the wind, maybe a coyote wandering near the fence, but then came the voice. A man's voice, low and drawn, whispering her name through the thin glass of the window. Clara. The sound froze her blood. She rushed to the door, lantern trembling in her hand. But when she stepped outside, there was nothing. Only the wide, dark plain stretching into silence, and the barn standing in the distance like a shadow that never moved. The next morning, she said nothing to the children, not wanting to scare them, but her eyes kept drifting toward that locked door across the field. Every night after, the sound returned. Sometimes footsteps, sometimes that faint whisper calling her again, as if the wind itself carried his voice. Yet she didn't run. Instead, she prayed quietly, clutching the cross around her neck, vowing to protect those children with everything she had. The prairie might have been vast and cold, but her promise burned warmer than any fire. Still, deep inside, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was waiting out there just beyond the light. The wind had quieted the next morning, leaving behind a heavy stillness that seemed to cling to everything it touched. Clara wrapped her shawl tight around her shoulders and stepped outside, her breath turning white in the cold air. She had promised Eli she would fix the broken gate and needed tools from the barn. For days she had avoided that place, but something inside her urged her to face it now, to see what lay behind those locked doors. The chain was rusted and stiff, but after a few hard pulls it gave way with a sharp snap. The door creaked open, releasing a wave of damp air that smelled of hay, metal, and something faintly sour. Dust floated through the thin beams of light cutting across the dark space. At first it looked ordinary. Stacks of tools, barrels, and an old plow, but as her eyes adjusted, she noticed a large trunk near the back wall, half buried beneath a torn blanket. Her hands trembled as she knelt beside it. The lock was broken, easy to lift, and when she opened the lid, the breath caught in her throat. Inside lay a man's coat, stiff with dried blood along the collar and sleeves. For a moment, she couldn't move. Her mind refused to believe what her eyes saw. She reached out, her fingers brushing against the rough fabric, and felt the chill of something terrible. Beneath the coat were letters, dozens of them tied with a faded red ribbon. The paper was yellowed, some edges torn, the ink smeared by time. She lifted one and unfolded it carefully. "Dearest Samuel," it began, written in delicate handwriting. "I'll come to you soon." Her heart pounded as she read the next, and then the next. Every letter was from a different woman, each line filled with hope, love, and promise. Yet all spoke the same final words. "I'll come to you soon." The realization struck her like a blade. She wasn't the first. There had been others, women who had believed in his words, who had traveled across the wild country for a future that never came. Her throat tightened as the weight of it settled in. What had happened to them? She turned toward the far corner of the barn and saw something else, a shallow patch of dirt, uneven and darker than the rest. Her stomach twisted. The air felt colder, heavier, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. She stumbled backward, clutching the letters to her chest, and hurried out into the open light. The children were playing near the porch, their laughter carrying faintly through the wind, innocent and unaware. Clara forced herself to smile, to act normal, though her heart was hammering so loudly she thought they might hear it. As she walked back toward the house, her thoughts spun in silence. The man she was meant to marry had built his home on lies, and she had stepped straight into his shadow. Somewhere beneath this land, the truth waited, buried and patient, and now that she had found its first trace, she knew there would be no turning back. That night, the sky turned black with thunder, and the wind screamed across the plains as rain hammered against the roof like stones. The children huddled close to the fire while Clara tried to calm their fears, but deep inside she felt a storm of her own. The discovery in the barn haunted her every breath. She could still smell the old blood on that coat, still see the name signed at the bottom of those letters. When a sudden crash of thunder shook the house, she noticed Eli sitting apart from the others, his eyes fixed on the flames with a hollow stare that didn't belong to a child. She walked to him and knelt quietly. "Eli," she whispered, "you know something, don't you?" For a moment he didn't move. Then his shoulders began to tremble, and his voice came out low, breaking with each word. "He wasn't who you think he was," he said. He lied to everyone. He used to write letters to women, promising them a new life here. They came from far away just like you. He told us they left after a few days, but they never did." The room fell silent except for the wind rattling the shutters. Clara's throat tightened as she listened to the truth she had already feared. Eli continued, tears now running down his face. "One night I heard screaming from the barn. He told me never to speak of it. He said if I did, he'd take the others away too. I tried to believe he was good, but I know now he wasn't." The firelight flickered across his face, and Clara felt her heart break for the boy who had carried a secret too heavy for his years. She wanted to cry, but she couldn't. The others were watching, waiting for her to say something, to make the darkness smaller. She took Eli's hand and whispered, "It's not your fault. None of this is." Lightning flashed outside, and in that split second she saw a figure on horseback approaching through the rain. A deep pounding at the door followed. Clara opened it cautiously, and a man in a soaked uniform stood there, his badge glinting in the dim light. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm Deputy Marshal Avery. I'm looking for Samuel Boyd." The name felt like a blade through the air. Clara shook her head slowly. "He's not here," she said. The marshal's jaw tightened. "We've been after him for months. Murder, mail fraud, and disappearance of several women. Last anyone saw him, he was heading north through the Badlands. You're lucky if he's gone." Clara's hands trembled as she realized the full truth. The man she had come to marry had been a killer. She thanked the marshal, and when he rode off into the storm, she turned back to the children. Their faces were pale with fear, but she drew them close and spoke softly. "He's not coming back. Not ever." The wind moaned through the cracks of the house, but Clara's voice stayed steady. She had walked into a nightmare and found 7 souls who needed saving. Whatever evil had once lived on this land, she vowed it would end with her. When the snow melted and the prairie turned green again, Clara watched the children running through the tall grass, their laughter rising with the wind, and for the first time the house felt alive. She had built something new out of broken pieces, teaching them to read, to pray, and to believe that kindness could grow even in a place touched by darkness. The fields that once echoed with fear now carried the sound of hope. Yet every night when the world grew quiet, Clara would pause by the window and listen. Sometimes, through the hush of the wind, she swore she could still hear her name whispered softly from the distance, like a ghost unwilling to fade. But she never turned away. She would smile, whisper a prayer, and hold her lantern high against the dark. Because in the Wild West, even haunted hearts could find their way home.